Hello, friends, and welcome to the rest of the sermon. Today is a special day. Today marks the very first time we have a guest co-host. Now, if you're with us regular on this program, you know that I have a co-host every single week, but it's always one of my staff members. But today, for the very, very first time, we have somebody that's not on our staff team, but I would say maybe the most faithful and loyal listener of our podcast, Mr. Garrett Willis. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good today.
You seem you seem very excited right now. You just can't be contained right now. The level of excitement coming out of you. Usually your dad is on this with me a lot of times, but he is in Poland right now, isn't he?
Yeah.
I asked you this morning. I said, how's your dad doing? You're like, I don't know. I've heard from your dad more than you've heard from your dad. They're doing great over their mission work in Poland, but. For those who are going, why is Garrett on there today? Well, he loves to tell me about what's been going on, how he listens to our show and through Matthew and been enjoying that. So I said, you know what? We got some time this summer. Let's get him on the program. So he's coming in here today to join us, and I'm so excited about what you have been experiencing in Matthew and going through that. Before we get that, just how's your life going, buddy? What's happening with you?
Life's going good right now. I've been volunteering more, doing other additional work at MoDOT, just things. So
an engineer at MoDOT. We were just talking about you're about to take or getting ready for your professional engineer's exam. To be professional, you're already an engineer, but to be professional, that's pretty impressive, dude. I'm excited. And you've got a 1-year wedding anniversary, not just too awful far away, right?
Yeah, about 2.5 months.
What was that, in October or November?
October.
Yeah, you better know, man. You look around for a second, like no, you have to know that by heart. So yeah, that's not far away. Can't believe it's almost been a year since you and Chloe got married, and so excited about that. And man, just a lot of stuff happening. So that's great. I'm glad you're here, but I got to tell you, my mind is in kind of two places today. First of all, it's hot in our studio right now. And so for those who, are going to be listening to this, they don't know, I am already sweating at the beginning of our program here. It's hot in here today. But really why my mind's at a different place, not because it's hot right now, is because my oldest son, Peyton, is driving for the very first time by himself today.
Man.
Do you remember that? Do you remember the first day that you had your license and drove by yourself? Is that something like one of those markers in your young life?
Yeah, I remember driving to football practice. I had to drive on the highway. It was like 20 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
So
I remember when the day I turned 16, got my license, I actually was driving in Fort Worth traffic on the highway. My son is not doing that today. It's band camp right now, so he has to be at band camp early. And so usually this time of year, I'm getting up extra early to take him to band camp. But he passed his driver's exam yesterday with an 80. Woohoo! Way to go, Peyton. So I told him, I said, I think I got a 90 when I don't remember if that's what I got or not, but I just wanted to one up him. He passed his test. Though actually the instructor said he did a very, very good job. And so he was so excited this morning to drive his car to band camp by himself, and to go to lunch with his friends.
Yeah.
Drive to youth group tonight, because right now it's a Wednesday when we're recording this, and drive home. And so I'm excited for him, but I've been checking Life 360 a bunch already this morning. Are you where you're supposed to be? And checking how fast you're driving. So I'm a little bit of a nervous dad right now, but that's okay. You know what? Life goes on, and we'll figure that out too. Hey, we've been in Matthew now for a little over 6 months. I shared this past Sunday. We're a third of the way through this book of the Bible. I can't believe we've already gone through that much, but also means we still got a lot of ways to go. But I'm excited about that. Let me just ask you, what has been your impressions of our journey in Matthew so far? Not just the passage we talked about Sunday. We'll jump into that in just a minute. But kind of what's been that thing that's been coming out to you as we've been going verse by verse through Matthew?
I never thought so much about how long the Sermon on the Mount is. Like it took 6 weeks or so to
7 actually
7 weeks. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think my favorite one we did was the beginning of Matthew chapter 7, where you said the 4 words were true happiness looks different, or stop judging and start loving. I think that was really one that spoke to me, and God was working on me, just because we're in an election year, or politics can be a thing, but I just think
it's a little crazy, doesn't it?
It's good to just remember that everyone is, you need to see what it's like in other people's shoes and be able to Be compassionate.
I agree with you. The Sermon on the Mount was kind of one of my favorite parts so far going through, just because of how much Jesus turns things on its head, right? Just the way the world lives right now and the way everybody's acting and all this stuff. And I think if we go back to his words, there's so much practical application we need to pay attention to. Of course, I mean, the main point of his sermon was showing us that we can't get righteousness ourselves. There's no way we can be good enough. So we have to look to him, but that's what changes our hearts for those things of how we deal with judging and loving and giving and praying and fasting and all the stuff he dealt with. And so that was a really good point, a really good to look at. And I'm not complimenting my sermons. I'm complimenting Christ's sermons because this is his teachings, and it's really been effective to look at that. And it's been a joy for me just to talk about what Christ is talking about. But let's jump into our passage from Sunday. So we're in Matthew 9. We talk about Matthew's story. We were in verses 9 through 17. And basically, I talked about how Matthew was called to be an apostle because of his attitude and a willingness to let God do something new in his life. We kind of did the sermon backwards a little bit. We talked about first those statements where Jesus says, don't put new wine in old wineskins, and don't put the new patch on the old clothes. Talking about how that life of a rigid heart doesn't work well with a new thing of God. You need to have flexibility. We talk about those who were inflexible, those who were judging Jesus for not fasting or hanging out with certain type of people. And then we went back all the way to look at Matthew and talk about how he was willing to leave his life of being a tax collector and follow Jesus, And so this was just this amazing thing because he had the heart that said, I'm willing to let something new happen in my life. He was a new wineskin. He's willing to be taken into this new thing that God would do in his life. And even though we don't have a lot of details about the life of Matthew, at least in the Bible, we get that little story, and then we get other scenes of the disciples, obviously. We do know his life was changed. I think I mentioned this Sunday that there are some historical writings, excuse me, that show Matthew then after, the time of Jesus' death and resurrection and the years after, as the apostles spread out, that he would have gone into Africa, North Africa area, and spread the gospel and was eventually martyred for his faith. So there is some historical writing on that thing that we would say is probably what happens. But, a man who was a tax collector who was hated, his life was changed and made such an impact for Christ. And what a wonderful, wonderful thing that is. Let's talk about tax collectors for a minute. Are you ready to talk about tax collectors? Because you like the tax man, don't you?
Yeah, just graduated a few years ago, so I know what taxes are
right,
about.
you are learning what taxes are all about. Absolutely. I was mentioning the Sunday sermon about the life of Matthew, how he was hated. And I don't think we get to realize just how despicable people would have thought he was. So there's a guy named Alfred Edersheim, who is a Jewish historical writer. He lived in the 1800s in Europe. He actually became a convert to Christianity, became a believer in Jesus. And his most famous work was a book called The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. And really just amazing work and life of faith there. So a guy that, I love it when you have somebody who has a strong Jewish perspective, Hebrew knowledge, and is able to apply that for Christ. And so he actually, in that book, writes about the system of tax collectors in the time of Jesus, which this is pretty interesting, I think, trying to give more detail. And it actually gives us an insight to maybe who Matthew was. Now, you understand, nobody likes the tax man, right? Even today, we're like, oh, tax season rolls around. I'll tell you, when I get my personal property tax bill, I moved to Missouri, and in Texas, there was no state tax. There was just a federal tax, and there was no personal property tax. I moved to Missouri, and I go, what's this state tax all about? And personal property tax, are you kidding me? In December, telling me you're going to tax me on all my vehicles and all this kind of stuff. Tax man's getting it one way or the other, right? No fun. So even today, we go like, okay, we don't like the tax man, but we understand that they're part of society. We may know people and I've known people who work for IRS, and they're not terrible people. But you got to understand, in Christ's day, what a big deal this was. So obviously, Israel was ruled over by Romans. That in this time of the world, in Jesus' system, that the Romans ruled over it, and but each of these areas, including Israel or Palestine, they had the right. They had governance themselves, but they still owed allegiance to Rome. And so that was we know this is the tension of the day in Christ's time. Well, they had to be taxed. If you think Rome's going to have a territory or a district that they're not going to, of course they're going to tax it, just like still today. And so Alfred Edersheim writes about the two different types of tax collectors. Now, I know our listeners right now are just going, they're thinking the same thing you're right now, going, are we about to literally have a lecture on the type of tax collectors? We are. Buckle up, friends. It's about to happen. But this is good. There were two types of tax collectors. One known as the Gabai, and one known as the Mokes. And I may not be pronouncing that second one correctly. I've been trying to find the actual Hebrew of it. And so forgive me, Hebrew speakers, if I've got that one wrong. But Gabai and Mokes. Now, when Rome said, hey, we're going to tax our districts, what they would do is, in Israel and other places, people could kind of buy the rights to be the tax collector for Rome for a district or two. That was the way life worked. You could, get rights from Rome to say, hey, I'm going to collect the taxes. I'll send it on to you, Rome, but I'll take care of the tax collection. And so they would do that, but guess what? There was a bad news and good news with this. If you said, I'll buy the rights to be a tax collector, first of all, people hated you because you looked like you were, loyal to Rome. And so here in Israel, if you said, I'll be one of your tax collectors, if I buy the right to collect tax for this district, you would have been seen as a anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, pro-Rome kind of person. So already you're hated. And you might go, well, why would you do it? Because you got to keep the excess. So this was the corrupt system that was going on. You go, well, I'll collect the taxes and I'll send to Rome what I'm supposed to send to them. But if I took in a little bit extra, it's okay. See, nowadays when we do our taxes, we get that lovely refund at the end of the day, which that's a whole different thing. You hope you maybe get a little bit of refund in tax season, but it didn't work on that day. If you pay too much to the tax man, too bad, they get to keep it, and they often did. Now, the Gabai tax collectors, and a good way to remember that, and I'm not the first one to come up with this joke, just remember you're saying goodbye to your money. You like that one. Okay, very good. I got a laugh out of it. So the Gabai was kind of like, he did the taxes that everybody taxes, the property taxes, the land taxes, the income tax, like the taxes that have always been around, that are around still to this day. Nobody liked that guy, but everybody understood you have to have a Gabai or a person like him, because those are taxes. A government cannot function if the citizens don't pay their tax on things. And so while you may like it, you're going to pay tax on your land, right? Mm-hmm. So there was the Gabai. They didn't like him, but they were there, understood. But then there was the Mokes, M-O-H-K-E-S, is how we'd spell that in English, the Mokes. These were the guys that had freedom, basically a tax on whatever they wanted to. There's no real written system of what you want to tax. If you want to start a business, well, they're going to say, well, you got to pay me a little bit of tax. If they want to tax a road and you're driving along with your cart, well, they're going to tax you. And they might say, well, you've got X amount of axles on your cart. Let's tax you per axle. If your crop is doing really good, then it comes and says, well, your crop is really good this year. I want to tax you a little bit extra. They had the right to do so. This was kind of the tax on whatever they wanted to do, however they wanted to do it, and for how much they wanted to do it. A huge system of corruption out there for the Mokes. It was this thing of, they could tax how they wanted to, when they wanted to, and there was very little regulation. But still, there was, stick with me here, the great Mokes and the little Mokes.
So there's two different types?
Absolutely. You're just amazed by this, aren't you, right now? You're like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to process this information right now. The great Mokes and the little Mokes. The great Mokes, basically, you almost can think of it like this, like a mafia boss, right? And I mean, it's probably not a bad illustration or comparison. The mafia boss, he's in charge of all the what's going to be taxed, but he's not out there collecting the money,
Yeah.
right? He's kind of like, I'm going to decide what I'm going to collect from people and who I'm going to extort, but I'm not going to be out there collecting money. The little mokes are the ones who actually were the ones physically collecting the tax. They're sitting out the table. So you have this hierarchy of tax collectors. You have the gabais that are hated. You have the mokes that are despised. But then you have the little mokes. They're the end of the line. They're the last ones, and they're the ones that are actually collecting the money, and they're corrupt too, right? They're taking their percentage off of it. Well, you want to guess what Matthew was?
Probably the lowest.
Right there. You got it. I led you right to it. Little mokes. Yeah, I mean, and now, how do you know that? It's because in Matthew 9:9, it says that he saw a man, Matthew, sitting at a tax booth. And the language there, and again, it's also recorded in Mark and it's recorded in Luke. Some of the language that's used there certainly talks about, would indicate somebody who filled the position of a little moke, a kind of the henchman of the mob boss, right? It's the one who's got to do the dirty work. It's the one who's not the most powerful or respected or educated. It's the guy you hate, because he's extorting you too, but he's just on a long line of people who are taking your property and money. And so Matthew was that kind of guy. When we talk about Matthew, and now he's known as Saint Matthew or the Apostle Matthew and all these things. Now, he did great things with his life later on, became a champion for Christ. But when Jesus calls Matthew, he's calling a pretty bad guy, a hated guy, a betrayer to Israel, to the Jews. He is somebody who's, taking taxes, taking for himself. And so when Jesus eats at his house, it's no wonder it says that he's eating with sinners and tax collectors. That's the same group, just like this, the tax collectors and the prostitutes and the mob bosses and everybody. I mean, this is like the low of the low. That there's been outcast of society. You couldn't have gone to synagogue. You weren't a part of the people. That's what it's like. I mean, that's who Matthew was. And I think it's so important to see Matthew's life when he's being called. Now, I'm just going to put you on the spot. You ready?
Sure.
Because you listened to the sermon. You may have made a couple of notes. What is significant to you about Matthew's response in following Jesus here at this point? Not only does he, and it says he followed him, but then it tells us about that he goes and throws a party for Jesus at his house. And in Mark and Luke, it says that this banquet or this meal was happening at Matthew's house. What do you see significant about Matthew's response to Jesus?
I think it's interesting because he had a greedy heart, I would assume, because he had the opportunity and the ability to get all the money he wanted, really, in that position he was. But maybe he was saying that it wasn't fulfilling him, and whenever he saw Jesus, and he just felt different, and he just gave it all up at once.
Right.
It was crazy.
I mean, I think it does say in both Mark and Luke, it says, and he left this table and left his things. So, I mean, I think you're right. He had plenty of stuff, but I would guess he saw the emptiness of it, right? Not getting him anywhere. I love the fact that he went and told his friends. Mm-hmm. And I think that's awesome. He didn't just say, okay, Jesus, I'll follow you. He's like, okay, I'm going to follow you, but let's go to my house because I got a lot of other little mokes and other people that are outcast who need to meet you, Jesus. Let me go throw a party. Maybe some of those resources he had gotten that he'd been living off for himself. Now he's like, no, I'll throw a party in my house so people can now meet Jesus. And they're there with him. And that, I mean, just like, not only did it change his life in this moment, but he's like, let me go tell my friends about this too. And I think that's also a mark of a changed life, right? It's not just, yeah, I'm going to be a follower of Jesus, but I want it to be obvious I'm a follower of Jesus. I want to tell others about my faith and introduce them to Jesus. What they do with it, they have that responsibility. But, a lot of times when somebody comes and says, I want to be baptized or I'm a follower of Jesus, I kind of want to go, as I look in their life, I want to see, is that something that is real? And one of the evidences of that is they're wanting to, tell others about that. I especially watch that in children or teens, when they say, "Oh, I want to get baptized." I had this happen not too long ago. A mom come to me and says, "Well, it's time for my child to get baptized." I'm like, "Really? Why?" "Well, it's just time." Well, no, it doesn't work that way. I want to see that child or that teen or even that young adult say, "Now I made a decision to follow Christ, but I am wanting to go make this public. I'm wanting to share this faith through baptism and through other things." And I think Matthew is the evidence of somebody who is, out there going, "Yeah, I'm showing my faith." Let's talk about Jesus' response though to the first grumble, because it says the scribes, the Pharisees, they're watching Jesus. They weren't in the party, but they're seeing it or get a report that Jesus is hanging out with these type of people. And Jesus gives this great example. It says, a physician wouldn't be hanging out with just healthy people, right? A physician's there to deal with the sick. I'm the same. That I've come to call the sinner, not the righteous. He's come for the sinner. And I want to talk about two phrases here. Get your take on this. First of all, the phrase, he says, "Go and learn." Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And that is such an important phrase. It's an Old Testament quotation. And now I'm second guessing myself what book of the Bible that comes out of, and I should have known. I'm just awful. Hosea. I knew it. Hosea. It comes out of Hosea. Double check me on that. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that one. So out of this phrase, but it's the phrase, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, is important. But the phrase "go and learn" is a very Hebraic expression. If you were to go to Israel today, you would see young Jewish men poring over the Torah. They spend all day, every day, trying to learn. And unlike in our society today, where we just try to gain information, you're getting ready for a test, right? So you're just trying to cram in information so you can produce it back for a test coming up. That's so not that culture. They're not so much did you get to the answer, but are you asking the right questions? And so to say to somebody and then go and learn, go and study for yourself, and come to a conclusion is a very Hebraic thing. So Jesus is saying to them, "Go and learn." Then he gives his Old Testament quotation, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." He says, go spend some time trying to figure out what this phrase really means. Now, Garrett, what would you say, without having done all the theological study, what is Jesus trying to get to when he says, "Go learn the phrase, I desire mercy, not sacrifice"?
So mercy is whenever you deserve something, but you don't get that something.
Right.
And sacrificing is giving something up.
Well, think about the sacrificial system of the Old Testament, right? So when he's saying sacrifice, it is that giving something up, but they were so built around that sacrificial
Like
system.
sacrificing the
Right.
lamb.
And so if Jesus is saying, here, go look at this Old Testament passage that says, I want mercy. Mercy is more important to me than sacrifice. What point is he trying to get across to the people?
Maybe to worry more about the people that need help rather than...
Yeah, you're right. It is dealing with, because he just talked about these people who are sick and the sinner and all stuff. He's saying, I think he's referencing here this idea of you go through the religious motions of the sacrificial system, but there's no mercy in your heart, right? He's going to deal with these Pharisees who are out there who are giving a tenth of everything they give, and they look perfectly, but there's no desire in their heart to go work with these people who desperately need Christ. There's no mercy in their heart. They'll go do the religious things, but there's no mercy behind it. And I think there are several times in the Old Testament that the Lord alludes to, says, the sacrifice is nothing if there's not the right heart behind it. And I think we can apply that today and going, I can come to church and I can go to Sunday school and I can give my tithe and I can go do a service project and all this. I could do a lot of things. I could pray and I could fast. I could whatever. But if there's no heart behind it, what good are those activities? And so Christ is trying to say these people who got so, religiously hypocritical. It's like, go back and go learn what it means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And it should explain to them, if they were to go and learn that, they would understand why Christ is hanging out with sinners and tax collectors. Now, Jesus says something like, he goes, I came to deal with the sinner, not the righteous. And so my question is, well, aren't they all sinners? He goes, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. That's the quote out of Matthew 9:13. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. So I guess I understand why he would be hanging out with Matthew and his tax collector buddies. But hold on just a second. Doesn't he need to also be with those Pharisees and scribes and all this kind of stuff? They're all sinners. Why is Jesus? I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to answer it too, so you don't have to get too nervous over there, Garrett. All right? You're sweating. That's just the heat in the room. All right? Why would he say this? Is he excluding them? Not at all. They're sinners. The Pharisees and scribes are sinners, just like the tax collectors and all that. You know what I think it comes down to? Those who recognize that they are sinners. Mm-hmm. I think it comes down to the fact that Matthew and his friends and others knew they needed a physician. They knew they needed to be healed. They knew they were confronted daily with their separation from God, and they had betrayed God's people and all the stuff they had done in their life. And they knew they were sinners. The Pharisees and scribes, they were sinners, but I think a lot of them didn't know that they were sinners. Right? Didn't recognize a need in their life. Mm-hmm. I really think that's what this passage comes down to in a lot of ways is, do you know there's a need in your life for Christ? For Matthew, the answer was yes. There was a need for a physician. For some of the people who were grumbling against Jesus, they didn't know they even had the need in their life. Let me just hit you with something. How have you seen in your life, not only from when you came to become a follower of Christ, but how have you seen just moments of recognizing that need for Christ in your life that's led you to growth? That could be like a 30-minute testimony. You don't have to give me that, but like, what's been those, one of those things where you've just recognized that need for Christ?
I think moments where you try to find your happiness in things of the world or in other people, and those things, if you find it in things, eventually you're not going to find that same joy. You're going to need to buy into new things.
Right.
And if it's people will let you down like God won't let you down. And I think in my life, I've learned that through like just things that happened in life, and it's drawn me closer to God because I realized that I can come back to God and trust in Him, that His word doesn't fail.
Awesome.
So,
yeah, I know you've seen that in several places, and you've certainly grown in recent years and all the things that's happened in your life, and that's been awesome. Well, you know what? That's Matthew 9 through 17. You got any other thoughts or questions?
I know it talks about don't cast your pearls before swine. Is that in this one?
No, that was earlier.
That was earlier.
Yeah, it was in back in chapter 8.
So that kind of reminds me of, is that referring to like he's not necessarily reaching out to the righteous people because they don't understand that they're sinners?
Well, yeah, obviously, when we go back to that passage real quick, we understand Christ was saying there has to be discernment. Yeah. And that wasn't Matthew 8. I'm lying to you. That was Matthew 7. See, I can think about things. Actually, hold on, I'll go find it. It was in 7 about do not judge. After he's talking about do not judge, then he also says, Matthew 7:6, don't give to dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs. And so I almost have all the Bible memorized. That close. Not quite yet. I'm still working. I'm still imperfect. He was saying you have to have discernment of knowing, what to share. And I think you could look at this passage as a good example of, it's not like Christ was withholding from a scribe or a Pharisee. And that's just language we use for kind of the religious elite, right? Mm-hmm. Because he spoke to them plenty of times too, although a lot of times he did it in parable form so that they kind of have to go search out what he means. But I also think he knew their reaction was so hard hearted. They were the old garment. They were the old wineskin. They couldn't have contained what he was going to say and do in their life because it would just they would burst, they would tear. And so there's a reason why I think you're 100% right. Why he's not having the party at the scribe's house. He's having it at Matthew's house. Now, when there is the Pharisee or the Sadducee or the scribe or the religious elite person that wants to get to know Christ, he has that, and there are some examples of that in Scripture. I mean, Nicodemus, Gamaliel maybe became a follower of Jesus. He certainly was open to some things, and others were, not all of them were closed off totally, but so many of them were. They did not see in their own heart the need for that. And so, yeah, I mean, Christ is going to be, there's a reason why he's not casting those pearls before people who don't even recognize their uncleanliness. There's wisdom in that. And there is, I think that's probably a pretty hard verse sometimes maybe to know how to apply for us, because who's the pig, or,
Yeah, I mean, Jesus has the ultimate discernment. I mean,
right.
We can try.
Being spirit-led, I think we have to go, okay, there's times where, I should always be ready to present the gospel and never hide behind it. But there's times I go, you don't want this, okay? I'm just telling you what I believe. I'm not trying to argue on you into heaven. I'll tell you what I believe, and then you can accept or reject or do with what you will. It's a hard thing to know sometimes, but even Christ, he's there with those who want to hear his message. So, well, very good. Well, thanks for joining me for the rest of the sermon. We missed last week because I did a last-minute change to my sermon. I'm going to try my best to have one next week, but I will be heading out. I'm going to be on the way to Rome and Greece to do a Journeys of Paul trip. So hopefully I can record a rest of the sermon before I'm gone, and then we'll have another week off after that. So summertime, crazy schedules. But Garrett, I appreciate you being on the show with me today, and maybe you'll get a chance to do it again. Your dad gets a little too crazy when he's on this, so you're right there with me. I appreciate that, and I hope that's been a blessing to you. Thanks for joining. Thanks for everybody for tuning in, listening, or watching. We'd love for you to share this or give your comments or questions, so we continue on this deep dive into the Scriptures. But thanks for being here today for the rest of the sermon.